When the mold finally closes properly, it's time to make sure that the cast doesn't fall apart when I open the mold. This means the two halves needs to be connected. This is also when I make an attempt to minimize the seam line, which is what I'm starting with right here. I mix up some Aqua-Resin and brush it into the small gap where the two halves meet up. This is a pretty thin mix, so we can run into the seam and fill it with material. My brush wasn't long enough, so I did the most human thing one can do. I made a tool. Now I can reach deeper inside the mold and get to some of the areas the shorter brush couldn't reach. Pretty crafty. Pretty soon I gave up on reaching everywhere and decided to pour Aqua-Resin into the mold and rotate the mold to get the resin everywhere. The plastic paste the mother mold is made from is actually pretty heavy, which was kind of a disappointing feature of it. A fiberglass or even an Aqua-Resin mother mold would have been much lighter and easier to rotate around. I tried to let the material run along the seam as best as I can, and I also rotate the mold around to make sure the cast is still even and that there's little to no pooling of material. Once the Aqua-Resin dried, I did a second layer of painting the seam and then rotocasting again. In this step, it's kinda hard to show you what's going on since so much of the work happens inside the mold. I don't have a camera operator to help me out, and even if I did, my arm is inside the mold most of the time, leaving no room to show you what's going on inside the mold. A lot of the work is also just feeling what's going on inside the mold, which, you know, doesn't translate very well on video. Then it's time to make sure the two halves don't come apart, and I do this by fiberglass reinforcing the seam line. I do my best to get fiberglass onto as much of the seam as possible, though there is some areas that I can't reach, which is fine. For the areas that I can't reach, I just wet out some fiber and kind of just stick it in there and use the brush to kind of shove it into place. And this seems to work. At least it's better than not having any fiber. And on some molds you get holes in the mold, in the seam line. You can see into the inside of the mold, and then you have to fill that once you get the cast out. But in this case, on this cast, that didn't happen. The whole seam line was filled, so it worked out pretty well. I did this in several goes as some of the seam line was upside down. And to make sure the fiberglass stuck to that area, I flipped the mold on its side and let gravity hold the wet fiber in place. And this helps a lot. It can be pretty frustrating chasing fiberglass that are falling off where you want it to be. And so flipping the mold really kind of solves this issue for me. This mold sat very well on its side and also upside down, which was pretty random. It's not something that I planned or made the mold planning for it to do this, but it kind of just happened, and it was a pretty helpful thing. So maybe it's something that in the future when I make a mold, I will try to make it so that this happens again. Plan for it instead of like this time when it was just luck. To attach the cast to a base, I fiberglass 2 bolts into the bottom of the mold. These stick out, and I can drill a hole in the base and countersink a nut to attach the cast and the base together. I've used 1 bolt before, but then the cast has a tendency to rotate on the base, scratching it. So this time I did 2 bolts. One main one that I'll attach the nut to and hold the cast down, and one that will function as an anti-rotation bolt. I hope this video was somewhat informing for you, and if it was, hit the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you for watching.